Good afternoon, everyone. Before I begin, I want to share some more sad news regarding city government employees. We have once again lost two more individuals to complications related from COVID-19. The first was a CTA employee, that agency's third loss. This employee was a bus mechanic who began serving our city in the year 2000. As this employee's identity has not yet been released, I asked the members of the media to refrain from publishing the person's name until the family is fully informed. The second individual was Officer Ronald Newman of the Chicago Police Department, also this department's third loss to COVID-19. Officer Newman served our city for 2 decades and was a longtime member of the 4th District. I had the opportunity to speak briefly with his widow and offered our deepest condolences to her and the family, as well as our continued support for anything that they need in this time of grief. As with each death, these latest passings serve as a sobering reminder of the danger of this disease, and I ask all Chicagoans to continue to be diligent. Please stay home and save lives. Please make sure that you are taking care of yourself, that you're washing your hands frequently, you're using hand sanitizing products, that you're social distancing yourself. We need to remain diligent through this difficult time. And now I'd like to invite Superintendent Brown to share a few words on Officer Newman. Superintendent.
Thank you, Mayor. What heartbreaking news we have to share regarding our officer, a third member of the Chicago Police Department who died from complications from COVID-19. Officer Ronald Newman served the department for 19 years and was a fixture in the 4th District. He is survived by a loving family, including his wife over 10 years, his son, and his stepdaughter. His wife works as a civilian employee for CPD's Office of Community Policing. This was truly a police family and it has sent shockwaves through our department again. During his career, Officer Newman received 137 awards, including 2 department commendations, the Joint Operations Award, the 2019 Crime Reduction Award, and 118 honorable mentions. Officer Newman worked on second watch in the 4th District. He left just briefly to work on the fugitive apprehension team, only to return to the far south side. I spoke with his partner this morning, his partner on the job, and he said this about Officer Newman: he was a private man, but those who took the time to know him were rewarded with a friendship that was enduring, dedicated, and loyal. Officer Newman never shied away from the difficult assignment. He worked a tough neighborhood and would quickly respond to officers calling for backup. He was also dedicated to his son, who dreamed of playing basketball. His son went on to become a 4-star recruit and play Division I college hoops. Officer Newman's last day of work was on March 22nd. He was admitted to a hospital on the south side for 4 days later. Who would have imagined that my second day on the department would begin with such heavy news? I have spoken to Officer Newman's widow and expressed my deepest condolences. She shared with me that she wanted all of us to honor her husband. First responders cannot stay at home during this outbreak. We are out in the public, patrolling the streets and keeping people safe. Today, there is one less officer that will be out on patrol. The city has lost a dedicated public servant, a husband, a father, and a brave, courageous hero. Rest in peace, Officer Newman. Star number 6622. Your sacrifice will never be forgotten. Now I'll bring up FOP President Kevin Graham. Kevin.
I was informed earlier this morning that Officer Newman had passed away from the coronavirus. Today, the Fraternal Order of Police lost a valued member of the organization. The police department lost a valued police officer, and our society has lost someone that can just never be replaced. One of the people in my office worked with Ron for a number of years, and what he said was that the people of the city of Chicago could go to sleep every night knowing that Ron was out there protecting them and that they should feel safe. They also said that Ron was a person that everyone liked to work with. He will be missed. He will be missed by the Fraternal Order of Police, by the Chicago Police Department, and the City of Chicago. The brave men and women of the Chicago Police Department go out there every single day to do their best to serve the people of the city. I ask that you have your prayers and your condolences for his family and keep his family in your thoughts. Thank you.
Now we're going to spend some time talking about what happened last Saturday in Little Village. Following Saturday's implosion and dust cloud at the former Crawford Power Plant in Little Village, the city took immediate action. First, in concert with Alderman Michael Rodriguez, we worked on plans to mitigate the harm to the residents and businesses of Little Village. This included placing air monitors and samplers throughout the community to sample the particulate matter that resulted from the implosion. We also embarked on a full-fledged community response, which has included providing the surrounding neighborhood with thousands of masks that were distributed between the city and through Alderman Mike Rodriguez's office. We've also undergone extensive efforts to inform families about what happened and the measures they can take to protect themselves. And we commit to full transparency with each step that we take, in part through the creation of an English and Spanish language website, where we have already posted a number of documents related to our investigation and where we will post additional resources for information and questions. This can be found at chicago.gov/Crawford Station Response. That's chicago.gov/Crawford Station Response. At the same time we were addressing the needs of the residents of the Little Village, we began an investigation into two key questions. What went wrong, and what was the city regulatory response leading up to Saturday, April 11th? As to what went wrong, it is clear that despite repeated and written representations to the city by the developer and its two main subcontractors, MCM and CDI, that they had a fulsome dust mitigation plan to ensure minimal to no dust would leave a site, they utterly failed to execute, period. The dust cloud, the drifting of that cloud over the Little Village community, is utterly and entirely the fault and responsibility of the developer and those subs, MCM and CDI. They clearly did not take adequate steps before the implosion to water the area sufficiently in the path of where the smokestack was going to fall. And what you see on the screen here is a picture of this site right before the smokestack fell. You can see here the little dust cloud that was gathering. This is right as the explosive charges were detonated. And you can see this path here does not appear to reflect any watering whatsoever. That's a problem. And as a consequence, we know the failure, we know the results. Total failure and harm to the community. And as a consequence, the city's Department of Public Health, in coordination with the Department of Law, has already taken the following steps. In addition to placing an immediate stop work order on the site that was done by the building department on Saturday, we have taken aggressive regulatory measures in response to this egregious violation. 16 citations to the developer as well as to its subcontractors, MCM and CDI. In respect to MCM specifically, their permit was immediately pulled, and we are currently in the process of reviewing its license to work in the city entirely. Meanwhile, our Department of Public Health is continuing its investigation, and we will be hiring an independent environmental consultant who will provide situational support for all matters on the site going forward. While this is happening, we need to keep the site clear and protected. And let me again highlight a picture from the site. This demolition on this site has been going on for several years. This is what it looks like as of April 12th of this year, so just a few days ago. As you can see, this site is still in the process of demolition. It is dangerous. Let me emphasize that again. It is dangerous. And what we have received even this week is reports of people trespassing on the sites, going there to scavenge different materials from the site. That is foolish and dangerous. We don't want anyone hurt on the site that shouldn't be there, that isn't taking the proper precautions, and clearly shouldn't be there for scavenging any materials from the site. So please, stay off the site. If you are found trespassing, we will take action to make sure that that doesn't happen again, including citing you and, if necessary, arrest. What I can also report is that the asbestos was removed from any areas, and this smokestack did not contain asbestos prior to its demolition. I can also announce that initial findings indicate that the air quality in the area does not contain asbestos in the air or dust samples that were taken during the community immediately after the implosion. Further results, once they are verified, will be posted on a website that I mentioned earlier, and Dr. Argody will share a few more details. Now, regardless of what this investigation uncovers, what we knew immediately was this. The results of the implosion that occurred Saturday was utterly and completely unacceptable. It polluted the air and covered over 6 blocks of homes with dust. It was unsafe and it was dangerous. As a city, we are committed to holding bad actors accountable. We have a track record of doing that, and that is exactly what we are doing now. And I want the residents of Little Village to know that we hear you and understand your anger. As I said on Sunday, I'm angry too. I wouldn't tolerate this in my neighborhood, and we're not going to tolerate this in any other neighborhood in the city. At this moment, our singular mission is protecting the health and safety of the residents of Little Village and your families, and making sure that we do everything we can to make sure that this never happens again anywhere in the city. Also, as part of this ongoing investigation, as a city government, we reviewed our policies and procedures to examine whether our regulatory infrastructure was robust enough in handling all aspects of the permitting and review process related to this massive demolition project. We've determined that many of the city's systems need updating. I learned as part of this process 3 important things that will change going forward. First, there had not been an implosion performed in the city since 2005. And despite the significance of such an event, which for safety reasons requires things like massive road closures, extensive notice to surrounding residents and businesses, and the sign-offs from no less than 5 city agencies, there was no separate, in-depth permitting process for implosions. In other words, by design, of a process that is at least 15 years old, implosions usually using potentially dangerous materials like dynamite were virtually treated the same as a standard fare demolition by wrecking ball. That will now change. I have directed Commissioners Friedland and Arwady, along with our Chief Sustainability Officer, Elise Zilichowski, to scour the country for best practices on implosions and demolitions in general, so that a new permitting process will be in place in Chicago. In the interim, we are placing a 6-month moratorium on any and all requests for demolition by implosion until the work on a new, more robust process is complete and in place. We are reviewing all demolitions scheduled for the next 60 days to determine what projects can be postponed during the shelter in place. I anticipated a bare minimum there will be a separate, more rigorous process for implosion demolitions, which reflects the significance and potential dangers inherent in these procedures. Second, I also learned that the city's practice regarding asbestos, which is consistent with practices all over, is to allow a developer to self-certify that all asbestos removal has been done in accordance with a pre-submitted plan. That process must also change. As part of the work of the commissioners and the chief sustainability officer, I have tasked them with creating a process for hiring the city's own senior environmental inspector who will be our eyes and ears on projects of this type, not just to review plans, but to verify that those plans have in fact been executed as promised. We will no longer simply trust or operate on the honor system. We will also verify. Finally, this experience has taught me that the city must immediately have a rapid response protocol in place to address the needs of residents, mitigate any environmental harms, and include all the things that we have done this week on an ad hoc basis. We need all of these important actions solidified in a plan and led by an incident commander and a skilled, experienced team. In this pandemic, we've been talking a lot about preparedness, and thankfully, we have been prepared to meet the challenge of COVID-19. We also need to bring the same rigorous standards to responding to an environmental incident such as this. And our response doesn't end there. We've engaged the U.S. EPA to test air quality in Little Village and surrounding communities. We've also been working with the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency to develop further regulatory measures to hold the developer accountable. For its part, the developer has agreed to fully cooperate with the City of Chicago regarding provision of information regarding activities on the site, and we have already gotten a tranche of documents which we will expect to be released today. The developer conducted a private street sweeping in the adjacent community following the incident and will continue to do so as needed. They also reimbursed the city for additional street sweeping measures. But much more work is needed to fix this current situation and to make sure situations like this never happen again. As we move forward, my team will also continue to work closely with community members on our next steps, and partnership with state and federal agencies like the U.S. and state EPA, and with the Inspector General's office to hold all responsible parties accountable for what happened. As I said earlier this week, despite the damage that was created by this failure, we will move forward as one city and one community. And Little Village will continue on its path of growth and vitality and vibrancy. I'll welcome our next speaker in a moment, but before I do, I want to finish by saying this. In case you couldn't tell already, I'm taking this very seriously, and I'm going to be personally involved in every step that we take going forward, as I have been since Saturday when I learned of the dust cloud that traveled over Little Village. We can never take what happened for this weekend for granted. And as we are seeing today in Washington with President Trump's attacks on clean air regulations, things don't just happen. They're the result of decisions that were made or not made, actions taken or not taken. And it's our communities that are forced to live with the consequences and to pay for those consequences with their health, the health of their families, and the well-being of their homes and property. Though we can't change the decisions of the past, I can tell you that right here, right now, we are making decisions on how to make sure that we are stronger as a city going forward. We've already gotten that process started, but we know that there's much more to be done. And at this time, I will call Dr. Arwady to say a few words.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just provide a little bit more detail about some of the testing. So the U.S. EPA, in fact, has set up multiple dust trackers. Those were set up on Monday to measure particulate matter, and specifically PM 2.5 and PM 10. Those are the small particles that can be in the air, and when they are smaller than 10 microns or 2.5 microns, that's the level that can be inhaled and could potentially cause problems for human health. No sustained readings have been above the national air quality standard threshold. That is good news. It is consistent with the area air monitors that had been set up previously by the Illinois EPA that were operating before the demolition. We continue to work very closely with both the Illinois EPA and the U.S. EPA at this data, and we will be sharing it publicly. CDPH specifically also installed 4 SUMA canisters on Monday. SUMA canisters are an ability to collect an air sample as a point in time. We wanted to make sure that we had the opportunity to capture that, even in addition to what the U.S. and Illinois EPA were doing. And similarly there, no particulates have been detected. No information has been generated so far that has shown a violation of the particulate matter national air quality ambient standards. In addition, CDPH collected 14 wipe samples from car windshields after the event that same evening. That was limited testing to make an initial determination, particularly regarding the potential presence of asbestos. Windshield wipe samples were collected from varying areas, including 10 north, 2 west, and 2 south in both the industrial and residential areas. No asbestos was detected in the dust wipes from the car windshields, and that is consistent with other asbestos sampling of the stacks that was performed by the contractor before the demolition. CDPH will also be installing purple air monitors following the finalization of locations and working on access agreements. Illinois EPA and the city are working together on further sampling. All of the data does need to be reviewed and validated. And as the data is reviewed and validated, it will be made public on the same website that the mayor gave right at the beginning. I want you to know that CDPH is taking this extremely seriously. We continue to make sure that our environmental team remains focused on environmental issues, even as much of the department, of course, is focused on our COVID response. Thank you.
And now I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, Mayor. First question on the first sad topic, and that is from Stacy Baca at ABC7. Perhaps it's best for maybe the acting superintendent. What changes will CPD make to address COVID-19 cases from this point forward, if any? Do you think cases are from contact with the public or congregating officers in close workspaces and other spaces?
Let me start, and then I'll invite the acting superintendent to come. Look, this is a really sad moment. You know, as the acting superintendent said, our first responders are essential. They have to run to danger, and they do that every single day that they're on the job. And it is a sacrifice that they make. I think all of us are cognizant of the dangers that they face on a daily basis, and those dangers are even more heightened in this time. I don't think we can speculate about how or when, because we're seeing so much community spread. It's not like the initial days when the virus came to Chicago, where we could trace many of the cases to travelers who had been either overseas or in other areas of the country where we knew that they had contracted the virus. Unfortunately, it is very widespread in Chicago, as it is now in communities all across the country. What I can tell you is, really from day one of this pandemic, We wanted to make sure that our first responders were safe. Our policemen, our firemen, our EMTs, everybody in the first responder family. So we did extensive training. We made sure that they got all masks and gloves. That training and that guidance has been ongoing as a response to some issues that the unions brought to our attention. The department made changes in the roll call, limited the number of people that actually could come into district stations. So there's a lot of things that the department itself has taken on responsibility for to really minimize the amount of contact unnecessarily that our officers and other first responders were enduring on a daily basis. But the reality is, it's contact with people is part of the job. We just want to make sure that they've got the equipment that they need and the training they need to be safe. And Superintendent, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, what the mayor said is accurate from my experience here early on as acting superintendent. What I would add, though, is our officers, all the first responders and the civilians are heroes. They, as a default character, they run toward danger. And we have emphasized to them, if you're not feeling well, stay at home. We have emphasized washing hands. We've emphasized all of the guidance. But these folks are accustomed to sacrifice. And we've had to instill the guidance in them, and they have been accepting of it. And we're continuing to look at ways to protect our first responders and our civilian staff as we go forward. And so we're partnering with our union reps, and we're listening for continued improvements. I'm speaking with, just on yesterday, the chief in Los Angeles and the commissioner, New York commissioner in New York, with things that they are trying so that we can share that with our folks and do the best practices as it relates to improving the safety of our first responders and our civilian staff.
And the second question was for President Graham. Is there anything you'd like to add to that? Any concerns you'd like addressed? Again, from Stacy Baca at Channel 7, and then moving on.
There are constantly things that are coming up that we are addressing with the city. Just yesterday, I spoke with the president of the Sergeants, Lieutenants, and Captains Associations, and we are working on a letter and a list of things that we are going to be working on. I intend to get that letter to the superintendent later today. But just before we came out here, the mayor informed me about one of the things we are trying to work on and trying to get that done. Now, that's her business to talk about, but we are constantly working on steps that we are going to try to keep our members safe. And so it isn't just today that we come up with something and we address it. It is a constant effort that we are going to be working on together.
Mayor, would you like to address that one thing?
Not yet.
Okay. Moving on. Mayor, the governor, this is a question from myself and also Gregory Pratt, coincidentally. Sure. The governor is expected to announce all schools are closed in the state for the rest of the year. When did you learn of that decision, and what is your reaction, especially considering CPS was scheduled to go until June 18th?
Well, I don't want to get ahead of any announcement by the governor, and I think it's going to be a little more nuanced if it comes today. We'll all listen in with great interest. We're in an ongoing conversation, as you might expect, on a range of different issues. Obviously, schools have come up, and we weighed in on what we thought would be the best thing for CPS, given the fact that CPS is scheduled to continue classes until June 18th. So we'll see what the governor says and when he says it.
So following up with questions from WBEZ on this, assuming you're going to repeat what you just said, what does closing out the school year mean for CPS plans for summer school? And if parents go back to work and schools remain closed for an extended, if not indefinite period of time, will CPS or other sister agencies provide supervised care?
Well, again, I don't want to get ahead of any announcement by the governor, but Dr. Jackson, Dr. McDade and their teams have been working on contingency plans really since the very beginning of this pandemic. They've had to. And once we understand what the governor's announcement is, we will come out with some communications to help students and parents, obviously faculty and staff, adapt to the latest phase of this very long and complicated process.
From Marianne Ahern and also CBS 2 colleagues of mine, can you give any more insight into patients at McCormick Place? We understand there is at least 3 right now, and my understanding is they are not necessarily diagnosed with COVID-19 at this point?
There's actually more than 3, and I hesitate to give you another number because it's a very fluid situation. As you know, the McCormick alternate care facility is intended to essentially be a safety valve for hospitals. So there's been an ongoing dialogue by the leadership there with local hospitals, one to explain the admitting protocols for that facility, and to work with discharge managers in hospitals to screen appropriate patients for coming to McCormick Place. So that dialogue is ongoing. We're kind of still working through that process. The first patients were admitted earlier this week. I know that this morning early, there were some conversations going on from area hospitals about new patients that might come there. So it's going to be an iterative process. But I have great confidence in the leadership there. I think they've got very good standards. I just came from being at McCormick Place early this morning, and the feedback that we've gotten from people that have vision of these facilities all over the country has been extraordinarily positive. I think they're going to be looking to Chicago as best practices for these kind of facilities going forward. We've made a commitment that we're going to share whatever information and lessons learned. And I know the leadership on site is in communication with people, even in other states, trying to figure out how we were able to do what was done in such a short period of time and with such a robust facility that can really take low acuity up to people that would need ICU. Now, the reality is if you need ICU care, you should stay in a hospital, but the facility can manage a range of patient needs, which is great.
That's, again, all COVID-19. That's specifically
I have no information whatsoever. We were the first site of this kind to say definitively that we were only going to take COVID-19 patients. And I have no reason to believe that there's anything other than COVID-19 patients there.
Okay, this is from Mary Wisniewski at the Chicago Tribune. Can you provide an update on COVID testing at homeless shelters, which you discussed Monday? We've heard the amount of people testing positive for coronavirus in shelters is quite high. Can you tell us what city health workers are finding, and are any steps now being taken to protect shelter residents?
Well, steps were being taken from the very beginning to protect shelter workers. And I'll have Dr. Arty come up to answer the specific questions around testing. But what I can tell you is this. As I've said from the very beginning, where our focus was on 3 big priorities. Number 1, making sure that the healthcare system was strong, and that includes making sure that we were providing support to healthcare workers. Number 2, obviously, is our first responders. You know, we've talked at length today about why that's so critical. That remains a top priority for us. And then another area of focus is vulnerable populations, and of course, the homeless fall into that. Now, almost 4 weeks ago, we took steps to depopulate city shelters, meaning decompress, so we could comply with the social distancing requirements. And as a result of that, we stood up 3 facilities right away. With the generosity and support of the YMCAs, we moved a number of people out of the shelters into these alternative spaces, and we made sure that we did it with the kind of care of people who are used to working with this population and the various needs. So we've had ongoing work that we've been focused on homeless population really from the beginning of our citywide response. And I'll invite Dr. Rarwity to talk more specifically about testing.
Thank you. So certainly this has been a setting of priority of testing for us because we think about a congregate setting, and we've worked here in Chicago to make sure that we actually have the ability to take action based on any testing results. So as the mayor said, right from the beginning, working to do that decompression, ensure that social distancing is in place. We work to make sure that, and not just CDPH, you know, in partnership, we've had multiple clinical partners. You'll remember remember last week with Rush and University of Illinois in the shelter setting. We've had Lawndale Christian, for example, working in conjunction with some of the folks who are going individual in the hotel, a safe haven, et cetera. Lots and lots of partnership here. And so what we've been doing is, first of all, anybody who had symptoms, making sure that we were removing them out of the shelter setting and moving them into an individual space, typically a hotel space, with all of the appropriate behavioral and social supports that were needed, and then waiting for testing results to come back. When testing results come back, if somebody tests positive, we then will either leave them in that facility or we will transfer them to one of the isolation facilities, where again, with all of the appropriate supports, we can ensure that they're able to, to recover. Certainly, if anybody is seriously ill, they would, of course, go into a traditional medical or hospital setting. We've been doing much more aggressive testing more universally now, as some more testing has been available. And so we're testing now on the order of hundreds of people a week in this setting. Certainly anybody who's symptomatic, but we've also started testing people who are not showing symptoms, and that's where we have started to find additional cases. And this highlights again that there are many more people likely who have coronavirus than necessarily may even know that. And we know that sometimes when you test someone, they maybe haven't developed symptoms yet, but for some people, they may never develop symptoms. And so in that setting, obviously, whenever we've detected someone, we've followed that same process. So we've moved folks into hotels or into these isolation settings and continued, most importantly, to make sure that the social distancing is in place, that the clinical evaluations, temperatures, those kinds of things are in place. Work to make sure, obviously, that personal protective equipment was available for workers. And really, it's been a very strong effort here. COVID is such that it is, especially in congregate settings, it's very hard to entirely prevent it. But the fact that we also worked to take people who were high risk for the serious COVID, the people who are over 60 and the people who have these underlying conditions, didn't wait for them to potentially have COVID, pulled them into individual settings and are making sure that they're getting the care they need. That sort of proactive work is quite unusual in this space. And so it's been one of the areas where, again, as we've been talking to people around the country, I think the sort of work that we have been able to do here, even though we're finding more infection, that's because we're looking for it, and really doing what we can to make sure that, these folks who literally cannot stay at home because they don't have a home to stay at, can be as protected as possible.
Okay. My next question is from Ryan Barrow at WGN Radio. Mayor, when safe, will there be a public memorial or remembrance for the Chicago police officers, firefighters, city workers, et cetera, lost to COVID-19?
So our city's been through a lot, and it will continue to go through a lot for the foreseeable future. And I've actually been thinking a lot about that, about what would be the appropriate way for us to recognize the sacrifice of so many who have died and unfortunately will die as a result of this illness. It's a really tough time because of the social distancing requirements. Families are not able to gather in the way that they would. I lost a former colleague of mine, great man, smart lawyer, and two of his children weren't able to come for his funeral. When you hear those stories, it's painful. I mean, it really is. As you know, when a first responder in the city passes, it's an important moment for us, an important moment for us to reflect, to celebrate the life, to support the family, and yet we're not able to do it in a way that we ordinarily would. So I would expect that as a city, we will have some appropriate service to really recognize all the people who have passed on and have a moment for us as a city to really deeply reflect. This is a painful time.
Thank you. And my last question, it's a series of questions. It is going back to Hilco from ABC7. Mayor, why weren't the kinds of added precautions you've discussed today already in place? How was the city's previous excuse me, how was the city previously or prior taking the company simply at its word, especially during a pandemic where respiratory concerns are of even greater and heightened concern? And finally, the company is pointing the finger at the implosion subtractor, just as you today are pointing the finger at Hilco. Do you believe the buck stops with the city or should stop with the city?
Well, what I know is this. The processes, the regulatory processes have been in place for a very long time. And as I noted today, they need some updating. But let's take asbestos, for example. It's a big deal to mitigate asbestos. You've got to have very specialized training. You have to be certified at a lot of different levels. And if you handle it wrong, you're not just subject to civil penalties, you're subject to potential criminal penalties. So most people understand that, and they take it very, very seriously. If you look at, and it'll be on the website, the reams of materials that were provided, they suggest a seriousness of purpose. Landfills have to be specifically certified to take asbestos waste, whether it's friable or not. So it's a process that has been put in place and has stood there, both from a federal, from a state, and a local level for a very period of time. And it relies upon people telling the truth. That's how all of our systems are typically set up. We set the standard, we tell people they have to meet it, and they certify to us that they met it. That's what happened here. But what I'm saying is that there are additional things that I think that we can do as a city over and above what the standards are to make sure that we are comfortable going forward. And so we're looking at best practices from across the country. We've already started to look. The process that I've outlined to you is very commonplace. I know that from my own personal experience. But there's more that we can do, and we will do that. And I feel like what I said, which is we had a contractor who made very specific representation to us about what would happen and what they would do to mitigate the spread of dust from this site, migrating anywhere off-site. And I'm convinced that if they had done what they said they were going to do, that we wouldn't have seen this massive cloud. But I showed you that snapshot from right before the smokestack fell. You look at that, and that's from a drone that the contractor was flying overhead. I don't see the use of water in the way that they told us would be there. So it's not a lack of robustness on the part of the city. It's a failure of the contractor to execute in a way that was consistent with the multiple plans and certifications that they gave to the city. And as a consequence, they're going to be held accountable.
Can I just follow up?
Unfortunately, this has to be the last question, Dana.
I'm just following up to that. I'm looking at that. In the future, in addition to what you announced today on a similar type of implosion project, does the city, though, need to put extra safeguards, with city infrastructure even to make sure that this isn't repeated? I know this fire department initially tweeted they helped and everything went great, and they took that tweet down. So does more need to happen on the day of?
Yeah, I think that is something that we were absolutely talking about. And that's when I was talking about having our own, in addition, now, to be clear, there were a number of inspectors that were out on that site multiple days leading up to this. And they've been out every day, multiple layers of inspectors since then, of course. But having someone who at a senior level is making sure that everything that was said is actually done. Again, that's not standard practice, but that's absolutely something that we are looking at.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we don't have time for further questions.
Okay. All right. Thank you all.